This is Michael Popok, and it's time for Legal AF After Dark, the dark and stormy night edition. This past episode of Legal AF, Ben Meiselas and me got down and dirty to talk about Colorado and Maine and the ballot banning of Donald Trump and what's going to happen next after full briefing and oral argument in early February at the United States Supreme Court level. Can John Roberts get enough votes to ban Donald Trump from the ballot? Will Brett Kavanaugh, the justice most likely to be the swing vote in this particular issue, side with the MAGA right wing, Alito and Thomas, or with Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts? Which will it be, Brett Kavanaugh? That's what we want to know on Legal AF. Take a listen to our most recent analysis.
Let's get right into it, Popok, and talk about what's going on here with the 14th Amendment, Section 3 cases where the United States Supreme Court has granted certiorari. What does that mean that it's granted certiorari? What happens next? Here was the order that was handed down on Friday, January 5th. The petition for a writ of certiorari is granted. The case is set for oral argument on Thursday, February 8th, 2024. Petitioner's brief on the merits and any amicus curiae briefs in support of neither party are to be filed on or before Thursday, January 18th, 2024. Respondent's brief on the merits and any amicus curiae briefs in support are to be filed on or before Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. The reply brief, if any, is to be filed on or before 5 p.m. Monday, February 5th, 2024. So that was the order. Popok, can you break down what's going on here?
Yeah, it's coming down. It's coming to a head here, as we said. Year one after Jan 6th, continuing our thematic here, our thread here. Investigations and arrests. Year two, indictments. Year three that we're watching now at the beginning of trials and appeals, and now the Supreme Court of the United States, which has been on the sideline for many things related to Donald Trump and his criminality and his participation, engagement in insurrection or rebellion, now jumping to the fore. For those who are wondering, I wonder what the Supreme Court would say about this. We're going to know really soon. There's at least 3 or 4 major issues. We'll talk about this one first, that are all up at the Supreme Court, being teed up at the Supreme Court, that impact Donald Trump and democracy one way or the other. Supreme Court over the next 30 to 45 days is going to brief and hear oral argument about whether 2 of the counts that Donald Trump has been charged with in D.C. election interference case for interference with a congressional interference with a congressional proceeding, in this case, criminally interfering with it, is proper or should be dismissed. They're going to decide whether Donald Trump should be on the ballot or not, or whether the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says what it says, or it doesn't as it relates to a former president at the time. They're going to decide whether Donald Trump has criminal immunity, immunity from criminal prosecution and indictment before his trial. And they're going to also weigh in on whether civil immunity applies to anything Donald Trump has said or done while in office or outside of office. So now it's all coming right up. They control their own docket, as we've talked about before. They can set their own briefing schedule. They signal how they're going to handle the case depending upon how fast or slow they set a briefing schedule and whether they're going to quickly or not. You just outlined, for instance, in the Colorado Supreme Court appeal, which is what this is all about, and ultimately Maine and any other state that's looking at this particular issue, is whether the 14th Amendment, Section 3, what we call the disqualification provision, which says that any person holding a federal office under the United States who took an oath to support the Constitution, that kind of federal officer, which would include, in any reasonable interpretation, the presidency, if they engaged, not indicted and convicted of, but engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution, they cannot take that office. That's the argument. And what's up for grabs with the Supreme Court, and therefore up for grabs looking for the 5th vote, like Brett Kavanaugh or Gorsuch, as Roberts scrambles around in the dark trying to find a vote to support some of these things, knowing that Alito and Thomas are way off on the MAGA extreme right, never to be reeled back in to vote anything that would be against Donald Trump. So he's got to find the votes from another group. The issue for the Supreme Court is fundamentally a number of things. One, does that provision that I just gave you the synopsis of apply to the president of the United States? Is he that type of federal officer at all? That's one. Two, what does engage in insurrection or rebellion mean? And who makes the decision about engaging in? Does that require a criminal process, an indictment and conviction, even though it doesn't say that? Who determines engaging? Is the Jan 6 report enough for a judge to rely upon as foundational evidence to determine that the person like Trump has engaged in something? Does Congress have to decide that? Is it a political question that gets kicked over to Congress and comes out of the court system completely? And therefore, Donald Trump is on the ballot in all of these states because Congress, currently controlled by MAGA, will never rule against him. Or is it for the courts to decide? Is it a state court? Is it a federal court? Is it Secretary of States of the individual states? Or is it something else? There has to be, I think we can all have one moment of agreement. There has to be something that implements the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Our founding fathers and framers believed that the language was clear and didn't need an owner's manual. They wrote, and you're supposed to assume, for purposes of interpretation and construction of the Constitution, that the founders placed every word in the order that they wanted, and they wanted every word to be interpreted properly and with its plain meaning. And they wrote engaged in insurrection and rebellion, not indicted and convicted of. So there's no need for a trial. And then who would determine that? So now this august body of our Supreme Court is going to have to determine, how do you implement this? It can't be what Donald Trump says, which is you got to go back to Congress, because it doesn't say. They know how to write with their quill pens when they want to on parchment and go back to Congress. Congress is the place if you want to get your disqualification taken off you. They can vote as a body to take the disqualification of the 14th Amendment away, off your shoulders and let you take that office. But it doesn't say that's where it starts or ends. That's where you go if you want to get relief. So this panel, this 9-justice United States Supreme Court, is going to have now. What I've outlined and all the different things they have to decide also provide exit ramps for the court to say, yeah, we're not going to do that. They could decide this is a political question, not for the court system. He stays on the ballots. Go back to Congress. They're going to have to say what the 14th Amendment, Section 3, though, and how you implement it. They could say that the president is somehow not a federal officer under the United States, and therefore didn't take the right oath of office to support the Constitution, and therefore it doesn't apply to him. That's an off ramp where they don't have to make that fundamental decision. Or they can decide that Donald Trump did not, despite judges already in the record having established that he did engage in rebellion or insurrection against the Constitution. They could say that's not the process for that. There needs to be a fill in the blank, and then they're going to have to fill in the blank. So these are the things. And now they've decided on a relatively fast schedule that by February the 8th, all the briefs are going to be in the can, including any kind of friend of the court briefs on issues that you and I have outlined. And they're going to hear oral argument, which you and I will be able to hear at a few hours later anyway on a recording and be able to report on. They're not going to rule from the bench, though. I want to manage expectations. The panel is going to listen. You're going to hear questions. We're going to determine where the votes are, maybe from the way the questions are asked, how pivotal Kavanaugh may be related to his prior decision-making in other cases, like the Cy Vance versus Donald Trump case over subpoenas, in which he said no man is above the law, including the president. We'll see where he sits on all of that. And then they're going to rule, but it's not going to be, I don't think, in February, and I don't think it's going to be in time for Donald Trump to be taken off the ballot in March for the primaries in those states. So he's on the ballot as a Republican nominee in those various states. The question is, are they going to rule quick enough to impact the November election ballot or not? So let's say they have the oral argument in February. Ben, when do you think they make the ruling?
I think they'll make the ruling within a month or two after that. But I do think this Supreme Court is going to try to find, and I could be wrong here, some technicality to avoid the constitutional question, whether they invoke the Purcell principle, which is a way that they've kind of constructed to delay these decisions until, after elections take place, whether they come up with some due process analysis. I think that they do not address, I could be wrong. I don't think they addressed, I think the 6-3, 6 right-wing justices, I think they want a way out. I don't think they're gonna, make the right ruling here that they should rule. I think they know that if they are applying everything they've said before about states' rights and strict textualism, Donald Trump's disqualified. And frankly, for that reason, and because there is no prior precedent on it, I think they're going to want to engage in some sort of constitutional avoidance here, which is different than what I think my analysis would be if the issue of absolute presidential immunity ever came before them. To me, that's an easy one for them to reject, that Donald Trump has no absolute presidential immunity at all. And in their own mind, they may think that there's a kind of a compromise here being reached. And Popok, you don't even have to go all the way back to the founders, because the 14th Amendment, Section 3 is a Reconstruction era statute. A constitutional amendment post the Civil War. So it's pretty easy to look through the legislative history, how that amendment even came about,
1857.
and know what the intent here. That's why if you take a historical approach to it too, you would know that it would directly apply to situations like this. And just to kind of frame the argument too, what Donald Trump's argument is really kind of four things. Courts, stay away from this. You have no right at all. 14th Amendment, Section 3 is not a justiciable issue. Court shouldn't be involved. Donald Trump argues, I'm not an officer, was never an officer under, as that term is understood in the Constitution as the office of the presidency. Trump says he never took an oath to support the United States Constitution, that the oath he took is somehow different than an oath to actually support the United States Constitution. And those are kind of the main. Oh, and then Donald Trump argues that it was not an insurrection and that it was peaceful and patriotic, was what he says that happens there. And then in the reply brief, the petitioners just basically say, look, Supreme Court, you should just, the Anderson petitioners say, look, Supreme Court, just focus on the issues here that are at the federal level. This is not for you to redo an analysis of the findings, whether or not Donald Trump's an insurrectionist. Those findings are the findings of the Colorado Supreme Court and the trial court. You have no role in this whatsoever. Regarding that, you can ultimately interpret what is an insurrection. You can interpret what is an officer, whether Donald Trump took the oath, whether it's a justiciable issue, whether it's self-enforcing, but stick to those issues, not the factual findings that are being made. To your point, Popok, indeed, Donald Trump will be on the primary ballot because the Supreme Court granted certiorari. By the way, I think for me, I'm okay with him being on the primary ballot if the Republican Party's become a full-fledged insurrectionist party and they want to put him on the primary ballot. The real issue is going to be the general election ballot for me. Final point I'll make, and then I'll throw it over you to close out this topic. You mentioned Brett Kavanaugh there as kind of a swing vote, right? In terms of, look, Alito is going to side with Trump on any issue. You know that Clarence Thomas is going to side with Donald Trump on any issue. Democratic members of Congress said that Clarence Thomas should recuse himself, which he absolutely should. But there's no sign that he's going to, there's no sign he's going to do that. So you've got those votes right there. I don't know what Amy Coney Barrett's going to do. I don't know what Roberts is going to do. I don't know. I don't know what Gorsuch is going to do. I believe the three Democratic appointees will find in favor of that the 14th Amendment. Section 3 says what it says it does by a strict textual interpretation. But the Trump world is really going after Kavanaugh right now. I don't know if you've noticed that, but they had Alina Habba go on TV, do the Fox, name check him, call Kavanaugh out by name, saying, we think Kavanaugh will do the right thing. He should remember who appointed him. And Kavanaugh also, if you just go back, whether it was the suspicious way his mortgage was paid off before Kavanaugh became a Supreme Court justice also, he was in a huge amount of debt outside of that, which he attributed to buying baseball tickets. I mean, he's a Trump appointee saying that that's why he was in a huge amount of debt. But they're clearly making a concerted effort to pressure Kavanaugh, because there was a previous appearance just the prior week where Alina Habba went on and kind of revealed that Trump's very nervous about what the Supreme Court's going to rule on this issue of the 14th Amendment, Section 3. So now they're going after Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and Kavanaugh is the is the focus not only of the Trump side, but of Jack Smith in his immunity filings related to the D.C. Court of Appeals and the oral argument that's going to happen next week. We'll be able to follow right here on Legal AF and the MeidasTouch network. They point out and call out in a positive way Kavanaugh and his concurrence in the Vance versus Trump decision from 2020 about the subpoena of Trump's tax records that the Supreme Court 7-2 ruled against Donald Trump. And they not only mentioned a number of cases that you and I have talked about at length, the Clinton versus Paula Jones case and the Fitzgerald and Nixon case, but Vance, Kavanaugh, frequently mentioned by Jack Smith as they try to find their fifth vote. Everybody's looking for the elusive fifth vote. You got to be able to count to five at the United States Supreme Court level. And I think you're right. You've laid it out properly. You've got Sotomayor and Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson over here. Roberts would go normally over there on things related against Donald Trump and, let's say, the extension of criminal immunity. And maybe not the ballot. I think you're right. There might be a compromise there where they give and take. They give Donald Trump, you can be on the ballot, but you're not going to be able to get your indictment dismissed. That we'd probably be okay with that on balance. And then trying to find from within Amy Coney Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh often voting together and joining each other's opinions. So that's sort of the sweet spot for that. And then you've got this really, I'll leave it on this, you have this really ridiculous argument, although I understand it, by Donald Trump, where he argues that the 14th Amendment, this is his last ditch effort, the 14th Amendment, Article 3 is only about me holding office, not about me being on the ballot. I could be on the ballot, even though I might not be able to actually take the office and get the keys to the White House on swearing in. So people are like, well, what are you saying there? Well, he's saying two things. One, he hopes that he sweeps in, if he wins, God forbid, he sweeps in another MAGA Congress and they remove the disability from him under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, just in time to get the keys to the White House. So he's disqualified, but they take it off of him. But let me be on the ballot because I have to win in order. I got to at least win in order. It's almost like the fake certificates for the electoral. We got to have the fake certificates in case we win any of these lawsuits. So you got to put me on the primary ballots. I got to win in order to convince MAGA Congress to take the disability away from me. That's the first argument. And the second one is, even if I don't, then my vice president becomes the president. So we got to really focus again in this law, politics, justice corner, who he picks for his vice president. I think you're totally right. I think they find an exit ramp not to make this decision. They keep him on the ballot, but then they take it away and they say, there's no way we're setting a precedent for the rest of our constitutional republic that a person can commit murder in the White House effectively and claim because they were the president that they can't be indicted. No way they're making that law. I'd be more than shocked. But strange things have happened.
One of the major doctrines that we see with the Supreme Court is this constitutional avoidance, where they don't have to address a major constitutional issue. They will try to avoid it. It's a canon of Supreme Court constitutional construction called avoidance. But I think if you applied constitutional avoidance to Donald Trump's appeal, the frivolous appeal on the issue of absolute presidential immunity, there's an exit ramp there that's beneficial to our democracy that the Supreme Court can take, which is this amicus brief that was filed by American Oversight, which says that Donald Trump's appeal of the issue of absolute presidential immunity, which is taken right now as what's called an interlocutory appeal, an appeal midway through the case, not once there's a conviction or at the end of the case at a final judgment. The Supreme Court can basically say, look, there was no jurisdiction for us to hear it. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals could say there's no jurisdiction for us to even hear this appeal on a jurisdictional grounds, and then kick it back to the district court for trial. And this way, the Supreme Court won't further delay that matter. I can see that happening.
Well, there is an example of what we do twice a week on the MeidasTouch network, exclusively there. Don't change that dial. Don't change that channel. We're only here. If you like listening to lawyers talk about things, they know what they're talking about. At the intersection of law and politics, you've come to the right place. We do that times 5, twice a week, Tuesdays and Saturdays. Why did I say Tuesdays? Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, only on the MeidasTouch Network, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So if you know all about Legal AF and you enjoy it, we appreciate you. Thanks for being along for the ride. If you can take that particular clip and send it on to friends and family and people in your life who don't know about us already, it's a great way to get them involved. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm Michael Popok. That was Legal AF. Look forward to you joining us the next time around. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.